Watch it where you're going, old man. The voice boomed off the sterile, polished linoleum of the base hallway, echoing louder than the slap of boots on the floor. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Corporal Miller, a young Marine with a high and tight haircut that seemed to pull his eyebrows upward in a perpetual state of arrogance, stood with his chest puffed out. He brushed imaginary dust off the sleeve of his combat utility uniform, the pixelated Marpat woodland camouflage blending sharply with the sterile beige of the administrative wing. Next to him, two other Marines, Lance Corporal Davis and Private First Class Ortiz, snickered, covering their mouths but making no real effort to hide their amusement. On the floor, a cane clattered, spinning in a slow circle before coming to a rest against the baseboard. A folder of papers had spilled open, white sheets fanning out across the wax-polished tiles like a surrendered flag. Jeffrey Warner stood there, slightly swayed by the impact, but still upright. He was 82 years old, though his posture suggested a man who had spent decades carrying heavy things, both physical and metaphysical. He wore a simple, short-sleeved, royal blue button-down shirt, neatly pressed but visibly worn at the collar, and a pair of gray slacks that broke just above orthopedic black shoes. He looked like a visitor who had taken a wrong turn on the way to the pharmacy. Or perhaps a grandfather looking for the base exchange to buy a birthday card. He didn't apologize. He didn't cower. He simply looked at the young corporal. Jeffrey's eyes were faded blue, pale like winter sky, set deep within a landscape of wrinkles that mapped decades of sun and wind and things no man should see. Each line told a story, carved by time and experience into skin that had weathered more than these young Marines could imagine. He blinked slowly, deliberately, his gaze shifting from Miller's aggressive posture to the scattered documents on the floor. The movement was careful, measured, like a man who had learned long ago that rushing solved nothing. Miller invaded Jeffrey's space, stepping forward until their faces were separated by mere inches. The corporal towered over the elderly man, broad-shouldered and pumped, full of adrenaline from the morning physical training session. He radiated that particular brand of invincibility that belongs exclusively to 22-year-olds wearing uniforms that command instant respect. I said, "Watch it, old-timer. This is an active military corridor, not some retirement home hallway where you can shuffle around at your leisure." Davis barked another laugh, sharp and cruel. "He probably wandered off from the hospital wing, Miller. Look at those shoes. Those are classic old man orthopedics. Probably here for his prescription refill and got confused." Jeffrey began to bend at the knees, the movement accompanied by the dry crack of joints that had carried him through 8 decades of life. His descent was slow, controlled despite the obvious stiffness, and he reached toward the nearest paper. His knuckles were swollen with arthritis, the fingers slightly twisted, skin stretched thin and translucent, like aged parchment revealing the blue rivers of veins beneath. "I am retrieving my documents," Jeffrey said. His voice emerged low and gravelly, textured like truck tires rolling over crushed gravel on a country road. The volume was moderate, unremarkable, yet somehow it possessed a peculiar quality that cut through the hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the distant sound of ventilation systems. It carried weight without shouting, authority without aggression. Miller rolled his eyes in theatrical exasperation and kicked the tip of Jeffrey's cane with deliberate force, sending it sliding and clattering another 3 feet down the pristine hallway. "Then move faster, Grandpa. Some of us actually have duties to perform. You're creating an obstruction in a restricted area." The hallway stretched empty in both directions. Aside from the 3 Marines clustered around the old man in the blue shirt, not another soul occupied the space. The claimed traffic was pure invention, a fabricated justification designed to assert dominance over someone who appeared vulnerable. It represented that casual brand of cruelty born from boredom, mixed with a grotesquely misplaced sense of superiority. Jeffrey stopped reaching for the paper. He straightened his spine with effort, abandoning the document where it lay. His eyes found the cane, followed its position down the hall, then returned to Miller's face. Something in the atmosphere shifted. The air grew dense, heavy, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the overhead lights. Jeffrey's stillness wasn't the frozen paralysis of fear or intimidation. It was the absolute motionlessness of a predator calculating distance, reading wind direction, waiting for the precise moment to move. You kicked my cane, Jeffrey stated. The observation was flat, factual, carrying no anger or accusation, merely establishing reality. I cleared a safety hazard, Miller corrected, crossing his arms over his chest in a display of false authority. The pixelated camouflage pattern seemed to shimmer under the harsh institutional lighting. You got proper authorization to be in this wing, sir? This is command territory. Civilians are supposed to stay near the visitor center by the main gate. I have an appointment, Jeffrey said quietly. An appointment? Miller echoed mockingly, glancing at Davis and Ortiz with theatrical disbelief. With who exactly? The base psychiatrist? You need help finding the geriatric clinic? Maybe he's applying for the janitorial staff, Ortiz offered with a smirk. Though honestly, he looks like he'd have trouble lifting the mop bucket, let alone pushing it around. Easy, Corp, Davis added with mock concern. Maybe this is somebody's grandfather wandering around lost. If he's somebody's grandpa, then somebody should keep better track of him, Miller snapped, his thin patience evaporating like water on hot pavement. He stepped forward again, using his physical presence as intimidation, effectively looming over Jeffrey's smaller frame. Let me see identification immediately before I contact the military police and have them physically remove you for trespassing on federal property. Jeffrey didn't reach for his wallet. His hands didn't move toward his pockets. He simply stood there, arms hanging loosely at his sides. The royal blue shirt vivid against the institutional beige walls, a splash of civilian color in this world of digital camouflage and khaki uniformity. On the collar of that blue shirt, completely unnoticed by the Marines who were too busy examining the old man's orthopedic shoes and counting his wrinkles, was a tiny pin no larger than a dime. Black enamel surrounded by a gold rim, it caught the fluorescent light briefly as Jeffrey shifted his weight, producing a quick flash of metallic shine before disappearing back into shadow. For one heartbeat, maybe less, Jeffrey's consciousness drifted. The polished hallway dissolved like watercolor in rain. The antiseptic smell of floor wax transformed into the copper tang of fresh blood and the sulfur stench of burning cordite after artillery fire. He felt humidity so thick it could be swallowed, the oppressive heat of Southeast Asian jungle, and the substantial weight of a radio handset gripped in his palm. He heard the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds, not the juvenile taunts of these young men. He remembered mud, slick as oil and deep enough to swallow boots, and the way the night sky ignited when air support finally screamed overhead. He remembered faces of boys younger than Miller, boys who never smirked or bullied, boys who died clutching photographs of their mothers and sweethearts. The memory lasted less than a second, a flash echo from a life spent in the red zone where death was always one breath away. It anchored him. It reminded him that genuine strength never needs to announce itself. I asked for identification, Miller barked, snapping his fingers directly in front of Jeffrey's face like summoning a dog. I don't believe you want to do that, son, Jeffrey said, his tone shifting subtly. The gravel remained, but now steel reinforced it from underneath. Miller's face flushed crimson. The word son triggered something primal in his pride. I am a corporal in the United States Marine Corps, and you are a confused elderly civilian in a restricted military area. I am not your son. Now get against the wall with your hands where I can see them immediately. At the hallway's far end, a door clicked open with a sound like a gunshot in the tense silence. A young woman, a specialist in Army combat uniform wearing standard operational camouflage, stepped through carrying a cardboard tray loaded with coffee cups. She froze mid-step. Her eyes registered the scene before her. 3 Marines towering over an elderly man in a blue shirt, the cane lying abandoned on the floor several feet away, papers scattered like casualties. Her gaze locked onto the old man's face. She squinted, leaning forward slightly as if distance had deceived her vision. She had spent the last 6 months assigned to the base historical archives, a quiet position involving the digitization of records from Vietnam, the Gulf conflicts, and the wars that followed. She knew faces from photographs. She knew citations and commendations and the men behind them. The color drained from her face so rapidly she might have been stabbed, all blood fleeing toward her core. The coffee tray began trembling in her hands like a leaf in a storm. She didn't know this man personally. Nobody on active duty really saw him anymore. He had long since faded into legend and retirement. But she knew the face, The jawline had softened with age. The hair had transformed from raven black to pure white, but the eyes remained unchanged. Those same eyes stared back at her from the photograph frame hanging in the most sacred, most quiet section of the base museum. The tray slipped from her fingers. The crash exploded through the hallway like a percussion grenade. 4 cardboard cups detonated on impact, sending scalding brown liquid splashing across the pristine white tiles in an expanding puddle. The sound shattered the confrontation's tension like a hammer through glass. Miller and both Marines jumped, spinning toward the noise with instinctive military alertness. "What the hell is wrong with everyone today?" Miller shouted, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "Is it National Incompetence Day and nobody bothered to inform me?" But the specialist didn't apologize. She didn't even glance at the mess spreading across the floor. She was backing up, fumbling frantically for the phone clipped to her belt. Her fingers shook so violently, she nearly dropped it twice while dialing a number that didn't appear in any general directory. It was a direct line reserved for emergencies, connecting straight to the aide for the base commander. "Pick up, pick up, pick up," she whispered, her eyes wide with something approaching terror, fixed absolutely on Jeffrey Warner. Miller turned back to Jeffrey, his anger now compounded by the coffee disaster. "Excellent. Now look what you caused. You're a distraction. You're a liability to operations." He reached out and grabbed Jeffrey's arm above the elbow. The grip was hard, fingers digging into the loose fabric of the blue shirt, compressing the thin elderly muscle and bone beneath. "That's it. We're escorting you to the guard shack for processing." Jeffrey looked down at the hand on his arm. He didn't attempt to pull away. He didn't raise his other hand in defense or strike back. He merely observed the fingers gripping his sleeve, then lifted his gaze to meet Miller's eyes directly. "Release me," Jeffrey said. It was a command, quiet and absolute as death itself. "Or what?" Miller sneered, his lips curling with contempt. "You gonna hit me with your cane? Oh wait, you can't reach it from here, old man." 3 floors above, inside a secured conference room, the atmosphere was thick with filtered air and the weight of serious strategic decisions. A massive oak table dominated the space. Around it sat men who moved armies with phone calls. General Vance occupied the head position, a large man wearing the Army Service greens, the iconic pinks and greens uniform that recalled World War II heritage. Every element was impeccable. The jacket deep olive, the trousers that distinctive pinkish taupe, the belt perfectly aligned, ribbons stacked impressively high across his chest documenting 30 years of service. To his right sat General Sterling, leaner and sharper, his service greens tailored with razor precision. To his left was General Holloway, a woman whose gaze could cut glass, her uniform bearing the stars of a major general. They were deep in discussion about budget allocations for joint training exercises when the red phone on the side table buzzed. Not a ring, but a harsh, insistent hum, meaning priority immediate. General Vance frowned. He stopped speaking mid-sentence. He lifted the receiver. "Vance," he said. He listened for 3 seconds. His eyes, previously tired and glazed with spreadsheet boredom, suddenly widened. His pupils contracted to pinpoints. He sat upright so fast the leather chair creaked loudly in the silent room. "Repeat that," Vance said, his voice dropping a full octave into a register Sterling and Holloway had never heard. "Where exactly?" He listened again, his knuckles whitening around the receiver. "And you are absolutely certain it's him?" Vance slammed the phone down. He didn't speak. He stood up so abruptly his heavy chair tipped backward and crashed to the floor with a bang. "Vance?" Sterling asked, rising halfway from his seat. "What is it? Is it a threat condition?" "Worse," Vance said, already moving toward the door, grabbing his service cap from the table. "Warner is in the building." General Holloway gasped audibly. "Jeffrey Warner? The ghost?" "He's in hallway C," Vance said, yanking the door open and striding through, his pace nearly a run. "And according to the archivist who just called, 3 Marines are currently physically harassing him." The silence that followed lasted maybe a fraction of a second before Sterling and Holloway were moving. They didn't walk. They didn't march. They scrambled like privates hearing incoming fire. "Lock it down!" Vance yelled to his aide in the outer office as he sprinted past us. "Lock down the entire administrative wing immediately. Nobody enters. Nobody leaves. Get MPs to stand down. I want a clear path. Sir, the aide stammered. Do it now, Vance roared, his voice shaking framed photographs on the walls. Back in the hallway, Miller had twisted Jeffrey's arm behind his back, forcing the old man to lean forward. Jeffrey gasped, a sharp breath through clenched teeth, but made no cry of pain. The agony in his shoulder was intense, old shrapnel wounds flaring under pressure, but he had endured far worse.